are hated by many members of my family because you want them to stop fishing. You want them to stop going to the national parks. They've been hunting in certain areas and you are going to take it from them.
Yeah, look, if all I knew about this bill were the falsehoods being circulated by the left, I'd hate it too. But look, Glenn, here's the truth. Every one of those statements that you made in your opening reflects falsehood. What we're dealing with is an entire generation of Americans that'll fail to launch if we can't bring the dream of homeownership back within reach. And years of failed policies have helped drive up inflation and helped make living entirely unaffordable for young Americans. We can't let that happen. Meanwhile, the federal government owns 640 million acres of land, nearly a third of all land in the United States. The vast majority of that land has zero recreational value. Disposing of a fraction of 1% of that so that the next generation can afford a home is a common sense solution to a national problem. Now, there are a lot of...
Mike, I will tell you that sounds great, but you're talking about building affordable housing deep in the Olympic Peninsula, which is a rainforest. It's a beautiful place. You just want the Olympic Peninsula to have houses in it?
Absolutely not. And look, the map being circulated by the left-wing Wilderness Society, run by President Biden's own BLM director and eco-terrorist, Tracy Stone Manning, is flat out misleading. First of all, when this bill puts land up, puts it in the category of eligibility for sale, it doesn't mean for sale. It just means there's a process by which it could be transferred. That's impossible right now. Secondly, with regard to any of these protected lands, the crown jewel lands of the United States, in this bill, it can't operate. Like legally, it excludes anything that's within any of the 15 designations of federally protected land. So if it's in a national park, a wilderness area, a recreation area, wild and scenic rivers, trails, preserves, seashores, lake shores, historic parks, memorials, any of the 15 categories, it's not even eligible for this. And they're working on changes to further limit eligible lands to those Forest Service-owned lands within 2 miles of a population center, and lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management within 5 miles of a population center. So this deals with land that is only in or near a place where people live, and it doesn't authorize the sale. It authorizes a process whereby it could be considered for that purpose.
I have heard from my environmentalist friends and family that doesn't give anyone they have no say in their own lands. They have no say in their own lands. You're just going to take it, and there's no process. You're just going to decide and take it and sell it.
Yeah, all absolute falsehoods. And look, the bottom line...
What is the process? What's the process, Mike?
The process for it requires the nomination, the application to the Bureau of Land Management or to the U.S. Forest Service. They say this meets these criteria. It doesn't fit within any of the categories of protected land. It's within either 2 miles or 5 miles of an existing population center, depending on whether it's Forest Service or BLM land. And at the end of the day, if the land is deemed suitable for single-family housing, and by the way, that's all it's allowed for is single-family housing, not high-density housing of any kind. Then and only then can it be purchased at a discounted rate so that more people can have access to land. Now, look, we're talking here about nothing that would affect grazing rights. It incorporates valid existing rights, including grazing rights, and would take that land out of eligibility for sale on something like this. There is no land that will necessarily be sold, transferred, or handed over just because it appears on one of these maps. What we're dealing with is a fraction of 1% of the land owned by the U.S. government, an entity that was never supposed to own between a fourth and a third of the land in the United States. And this is not the crown jewel land. This is garden variety land that's just sitting there vacant where people can, do, and should live.
Mike, why is this so controversial among conservatives?
Well, frankly, I think some of it is being driven by the left, by misinformation driven by the left and by people like Tracy Stone Manning. I think there are other people who would consider themselves conservatives who, for one reason or another, are not working off of accurate information. And because they mistakenly believe that this bill would do more than it actually does, that it would sell every parcel of land that we've got, or every parcel of land that's listed as potentially eligible here, that's going to bring on Armageddon. But again, we're talking about a tiny fraction of all the land the U.S. government owns, a fraction of 1% of all that. And in states like mine, in Utah, where the federal government owns close to 70% of the land in our state, and meanwhile, we've got people moving in from places like California. We've got families that are growing, and people are experiencing a genuine housing shortage. This is there to help address that. President Trump knows that this is unacceptable, that America should be dealing with such a housing crisis, especially in western states like mine, where there's a lot of federal land. That's why President Trump has talked about this sort of thing. He said they can't find housing. We have so much land, and we're going to put it to use. And I applaud him for doing so.
What is it? What are the chances that this goes through as is?
Look, I think we've got a very good chance of it going through as part of the big, beautiful bill, which the Senate will be considering as early as next week. And look, the American people will be better off as a result of this. We have to realize that it's more important, particularly in lands that are in or near existing population centers. We opt to make some of that available, especially in states with a lot of public land like mine.
I have family members, Mike, that, I've been joking about it here, but I have family members been going back and forth with me. We've had great conversations. But it is, they are really, truly terrified that the land that they have hunted on, they've camped on, they've hiked on is all going to be gone, and they won't have anything to say about it.
Yes, well, and that's simply not true. Look, we've got state and local government consultation requirements, and the agencies are still going to have to comply with with all kinds of existing federal laws, including the APA, necessitating a public process by which these lands would be considered. And so those who are suggesting this bill does more than it actually does, in some instances, people might be operating on good faith based on things others have repeated. But I think a lot of this is being driven by the far left and by people like eco-terrorist Tracy Stone Manning, who accept as almost an article of faith that you can't ever allow any land that is today under the ownership of the U.S. government. You can't ever let that be owned by anyone else. It's simply illogical, and it's very unfair to those who live in public land states.
And 30 by 30 wants 30%. So they want to gain another 3%, and 50 by 50 wants 50% of the American land. That is the goal of the left. And, I don't understand how people are not talking about that part of it, which is well documented. I mean, Biden put it into play. Why isn't anybody talking about this? We're talking about less than 0.5%, and they're talking about gobbling up 3% in the next 3 years alone. I don't know. I think that kind of seems important. And the other thing that really bothers me that the federal government is doing, our Treasury is doing, is they're trying to put all of our land onto our balance sheet. I don't like that, Mike. What happens in the end when we can't pay our bills because we just would never face reality? I mean, what happens then? Who's buying? The big banks, maybe foreign governments? Who gets that land when the government has just pissed it away in debt?
No, that's exactly right. We've got to get a hold of our debt and deficit. We've also got to make it possible for people to continue to live the American dream. And the way to happiness is not more government ownership. The way to happiness is to allow the American people a fighting chance in the race of life, and the ability to raise their families. Is just on no planet is it unreasonable to say we're going to take a fraction of a percent of federal land that's not protected and make it potentially eligible for consideration for a place where people could live.
Quickly, Mike, how did they get all this land? How did this happen?
All right, as states were added to the Union, starting really with the Louisiana Purchase, land that was not owned by somebody as of the moment of statehood was very often deemed federal in the Statehood Enabling Act of the state in question. In states like mine, and many of those states added since the Louisiana Purchase, got language in there contemplating that federal land would ultimately be sold, and that as it was sold, a percentage of it would go to the state, often, as is the case in Utah's Enabling Act, for the benefit of the state's public education system. The U.S. government honored that plan with respect to states throughout the Midwest. When we got to the Rocky Mountains, the land was regarded as rugged, not as valuable, and it didn't unfold that way, and policy changed in the mid-'70s, not leading to that. But this all comes back to something that was actually discussed at the Constitutional Convention. I believe it was Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, who in September of 1787 raised a concern, talking about the fact that, it could be a problem if the U.S. government controlled too much land in some of the states and utilized its vast authority over that land. It could compel those states to an undue sort of subservience to the U.S. government. And It's a legitimate concern. And it's a concern that I think is reflected in this bill. But this bill, more than anything, is there to help the American people afford housing, particularly in states like mine, where there's a lot of federal land that doesn't have any recreational value or aesthetic value or scientific value, but is in a place where people live and need homes. That should at least be eligible for consideration. Right now it's not. That's unfair. This bill would fix that.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I got to tell you, there's not a single person that signed the Constitution that would have signed it if they knew the federal government could control 70% of their land. They would never have signed it. Never have signed it. Mike, thank you so much. Appreciate it.